when you start a company, you're effectively signing up for a pretty meaningful life chapter. Think, when are we going to get to the point where it's like easy for me? And he said, John Andrew, it will never be easy for you. You are always going to have to try. And so when it comes to building startups and companies, your odds of success are exceptionally low. And so you have two choices. You can either be very, very thoughtful and strategic about what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? Or you can just be like, I'm going to wing it. Things were a mess. There was a ton of work to do. And I remember being there with the team and saying, no one is coming to save us. And so when you pair those two ideas together, that everything matters and that no one is coming to save you, then you feel this sense of agency and responsibility that hopefully can build a beautiful company.
Welcome to Just Go Grind. I'm your host, Justin Gordon. On today's episode, we have John Andrew Entwistle, the founder and CEO of Wander, previously the CEO of Coder.com as well. He's been a Teal Fellow, a Forbes 30 under 30, and he's only 27 years old. His latest company, Wander, is essentially a luxury home rental company. It's like an Airbnb competitor. It is incredible. You can book a Wander with inspiring views, hotel-grade amenities, dreamy beds, top-tier cleaning, and 24/7 concierge service. It's a vacation home, but better. And their slogan is find your happy place. Wander has grown like crazy over the last few years. They're only a few years old, and they've grown absolutely insane, which is why the perfect sponsor for today's episode is Row. Every founder knows how painful of an experience it can be to work with a bank, but Row makes it easy. Just like how Wander makes it incredibly easy to book a home, get an amazing luxury vacation rental, Row makes it easy to have a business bank. They have a single pane of glass you can use to run and scale your business from day one. That's bank account, corporate cards, expense management, bill pay automation, and accounting to help you move fast as you scale, just like a company like Wander has. Row is trusted by thousands of companies, ranging from two-person YC startups to brands like Perplexity, Cal.com, Splitwise, and more. And the big thing with Row, every customer has a person at Row. That's 24/7 customer support, phone, text, email. They will be with you every step of the way at every critical milestone in your startup's journey, just like how Wander is with you every step of the way in your vacation rental. To learn more about why startups choose Row, visit row.co today. That's RHO.co today to get started. Let's get to the episode with John Andrew Entwistle, the founder and CEO of Wander. John Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
There's a lot to talk about. I want to go back to the beginning though. How'd you become an entrepreneur in the first place?
Wow, we're getting right
way
into
back.
It. I started my first company when I was relatively young, 13, 14. Did well, low six figures in revenue. Meant that I was not focused on my homework, as you would imagine. I think when I'm asked the question of why did you start the company? My pop was a single dad, a lawyer. He took incredible care of me and my sister, always providing. And I think that I just wanted to work like dad. I saw him at his computer working long hours, and that entrepreneurial spirit, that work ethic was always there. I think that a more interesting question now, being on the second large startup, is why do you keep doing it? And it's interesting. I think that what I've narrowed it down to is about pride. Like, I love to make our customers proud. I love to make the team proud. I love to make myself proud. And I think that that's ultimately why I wake up every day, and I'm so excited to get to work.
I know you said on one podcast you had this 80-page document or something. You go through to evaluate ideas, took months and everything. What are some of the things in that document in terms of what you use to evaluate an idea? Because you've started multiple companies now. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I think the first thing to understand is that when you start a company, you're effectively signing up for a pretty meaningful life chapter. Think, at minimum, if you really see it through so you don't quit early, call it 4 or 5 years if it fails. You can even have some circumstances where it fails at the 10 or 15 year mark. And so you want to be really, really careful. The other thing is that I've had this idea recently. I've started to get chess lessons from this grandmaster, And to be clear, I'm not very good at chess, but I did find that not yet. But I did find out that you can get lessons from grandmasters, and I'm like, what a cool experience to like train with someone who's at the top of the game. And I was going through this puzzle with him, and I was like, so when are we going to get to the point where it's like easy for me, like when everything's easy? And he stopped. And he said, John Andrew, it will never be easy for you. You are always going to have to try. And I began to think about this idea that there are certain things, endeavors in life, so bringing everything back together, that are these long chapters until you find out what the outcome is going to be. And there are also initiatives or endeavors that are very, very low probability of success. And so what that means is that, number one, you have to try. Which means you have to be strategic and thoughtful. If you just wing it, then you're not going to have a successful outcome. You're going to fail. And so when it comes to building startups and companies, your odds of success are exceptionally low. And so you have two choices. You can either be very, very thoughtful and strategic about what am I going to do? How am I going to do it? You know, what is my strategy, my customer acquisition strategy, my growth? You know, what are the potential failure points? Or you can just like be like, I'm going to wing it. Ironically, I think that so many founders, and for whatever reason in our current culture, we celebrate this idea of like, just wing it, like just get started, just do it. And for me as a founder with so much scar tissue, I'm like, no, like
Please don't.
Don't just do that. Like, I want you to go and I want you to start something and pursue your passion, but please be thoughtful and strategic about what it is that you're building, because even if you're exceptionally thoughtful and smart and see the future beautifully, you're still probably going to have tons of ups and downs, tons of challenges, tons of pivots. And so regarding, your point, one thing that I did when I was starting Wander was create this sort of pre-mortem document. People are familiar with the post-mortem process, which is something fails and then let's figure out why it failed. I wanted to start it with this idea that, I was 23 at the time. I had just left my previous company, and I wanted to make sure that this next chapter was going to be successful. And so I created this document. Effectively, it starts to look like a business plan where you have all the different risks in your business, in your idea. And what you do is you start working on paper through them, and ultimately you reach the point where, hopefully, if it is a good idea, that you need to go out into reality to find out if it actually does play out the way that you think, which is great. But with a lot of ideas, you can actually kill them on paper. And I think that killing your idea on paper is way better than saying, like, let's wing it, and waking up in 5 years broke and tired and being like, shit, like if I had just been slightly more thoughtful, I could have saved a lot of pain and a lot of money.
What were some of those things with Wander in terms of, obviously you had to thinking through that as in the early days of starting Wander that could maybe kill this, or you want to do?
So Wander is an exceptionally complex company that serves a relatively simple customer problem, which is basically when you rent a vacation rental, we want you to have a really great experience. I think everyone has those Airbnb horror stories or bad vacation rental experiences. And so it's a simple problem to solve. The solution to it is radically complex. You have this idea of building a booking platform. You have to create a strong consumer brand. You have to identify the brand standards, the curation of the underlying inventory. And then you get into this really challenging problem, which is how do I create a customer experience that's 3 times better, 4 times better than Airbnb's, but has the same margin profile. And so you have to build this incredible software layer. And so as I was going through and architecting this in my head, I looked like a madman. But that actually is why I fell so in love with the idea of Wander, was because I had this childlike excitement and curiosity, and I felt like I was like uniquely positioned. The idea felt to me as if like it was this gift, and like I was the right person to bring it into the world. And so, for Wander, there were tons of failure points. Oh my gosh. I mean, marketplaces are incredibly hard to start. You have the cold start problem. You have to identify your network effects. Even if you think about the brand of Wander, wander.com, @Wander on the social medias, How do you get that?
Yep.
There were so many different risks, but again, I knew how to do it. I knew how to navigate through the solutions. And now we're at the point where we've hit product market fit, well over 100 people, scaling very quickly. And so I think that fortunately those early stage risks have played out in my favor. And thanks to being highly strategic and agile. And of course, you also have to adapt in real time to when things don't go well. And now there's a whole new set of risks, which is, scale and continuing to deliver value and those different pieces. And I'd love to say that document has gotten all the way to this point, but ultimately we are now in uncharted territory. And so I find myself every day going through that same paranoid process.
I want to go through more of the scaling part because it's incredible what you've done, and obviously you keep growing, so it's more problems that come potentially with that. But in the early days too, like going through that document, looking at all these different things you could be doing, you're mapping it out, you're being very intentional about this, very strategic. What are some of the first things that you actually do? Are you like, okay, I know I want to do this idea. It's like, I need this like co-founder. I need a founder to do this. I need to raise capital immediately. Like where do you even start? Let's just walk through that because I'm really curious.
Yeah. So I'm a solo founder. And so, the co-founder piece was something that wasn't on my agenda. However, building a team certainly is. It's very hard to build a great company alone. And so, when you think about if I was to define like what is a roadmap for a founder who's getting started, how do you actually go and do it? The first thing that you do is you have an idea. Maybe you have multiple ideas. The second thing you do is you pick the one that you're most passionate and excited about. And to be clear, no one should ever say like, I want to be a founder and now I'm going to go and search for ideas or whatever else. It should be very much the opposite.
Yeah.
Which is I'm curious, I'm excited, I'm passionate, and now I'm going to create a company from whatever that item, that thing is. So the first thing you do is that idea finds you, hopefully, and it compels you to the point at which you are ready to spend 5+ years of your life building this thing that may not work out. And that is, again, a very, very important thing to note, is that the idea, the calling should be so compelling that you're willing to risk it all. And when you find that, then you start all of the classic checklist things, which is, okay, I know that I'm going to need to register. I know I'm going to need a domain. I'm going to need to set up my G Suite and my bank accounts and all these various things, the basic infrastructure, payroll, etc., which nowadays is very, very easy. I could name 5+ random providers that can do all those services for you. I'm sure that some of them should sponsor this podcast.
Yeah. Thank you, Ro, for being a sponsor.
Yeah. And then it's a question of, okay, when I look at my pre-mortem document or my plan, what are the key risks and what are the things that I need to start building to prove them? And when, for Wander, literally my first question was, does anyone want what I'm building? And so what we did is we created a website that, and this is very common, well before you have anything, where, you talk about what you're building and whatever else and see if you get signups. But I took it a step further, and I wanted to know if people would actually pay me to see if they were going to be interested. And so we had a section of the waitlist, which was $100, and you would get a Wander hoodie and first access to the platform and $100 in credit. So it wasn't like the money was evaporating, but you had to trust us. And we did $200,000-$300,000 in revenue in like the first month or two that was live. And that's when I knew that we were really, really onto something. Like this was like, okay, like here we go. Then you get into, for us, we needed our first homes and, all the chaos, of course, around that. But again, if you go back to this idea of planning, which I think is super underrated, you should have really incredible clarity on what are the things that I need to do. How do I need to de-risk this business? How do I get from here to there to there? And as you go, you also need to understand that action will create clarity. And so as you move forward, if there's something that's unclear, as you walk towards it, you may get slightly more clarity on, the step after that and beyond.
How did you guys go to market?
Yeah, so we have two. When you say that, do you mean how do we launch or how do we acquire customers?
Even in the early days, when you're mentioning like a couple $100,000 in revenue from like even like the $100, like, how did you even just let's test some Facebook ads, let's test some Google ads, like take me through that?
Yeah, so the first thing you start with is very, very low scale, which it should just be your Twitter or X. you should just start talking about what you're building and tweeting things and hype and quotes and whatever else,
Yep.
screenshots of your product, and see if like you get any likes, even if it's like just some like random friend or whatever else. As you go, you should start to feel some type of signal, some type of movement, and from there for Wander, the thing just kind of caught fire a little bit. I knew the low cost channels to create, some levels of excitement, create a launch video and those different pieces, which is, again, what I would recommend is you start on Twitter, then you have a company Twitter, you release a launch video, and you see what the reception is. And we see that all the time. We see new products launching on Twitter all the time. And if you launch it and people are like just super unexcited, then there may not be idea market fit. And that's not to say that your company and your product can't be successful. There are tons of stories of people who had ideas that everyone thought was dumb, that no one wanted to do, and it took years and years and years until the timing caught up with them. For Wander, we were building the right product at the right time, so we had a recipe for success. But to be clear, that does happen a lot with founders and startups, is that you actually have the right idea and you are the right founder to build it. You're just starting it 5-10 years too early. And you have two choices. You can either have conviction and stick it out, or you can abandon. I think abandoning is really tough because in 5-10 years, you'll see someone become a billionaire on that same idea, which of course there are probably a lot of listeners with stories like that.
Of course. And with Wander as well. So with your previous company, you had raised a bunch of venture capital, had been pretty successful with that. Did you have that same kind of prep doc for that you then, okay, I'm just doing the same thing? Or like, was this a lesson learned, repeat founder now?
Yeah. So I started my first venture-backed company, Coder.com, when I was 17, 18. And as much as I'd love to say that 17, 18-year-old John Andrew was as thoughtful as I am now, I was not. I certainly had a ton of raw intellectual horsepower, but I did not have any level of experience that I do today. I've been a venture-backed CEO now for a decade, which is a crazy statement. And so a lot of that was the learnings and lessons through, unfortunately, a lot of scar tissue building my first company, and knowing that in that first company, started at 17, 18, I grew it all the way through growth stage, massive customers, Vanguard, Goldman Sachs, Palantir. I ended up stepping down as CEO when I was 23, and like that was 5 years of my life, and 5 years all encompassing of my life. And so I knew that the risks when you do go and start something new, because it flies by, and success, again, is not guaranteed.
Yeah, and that's so crazy to go for. It's at such a young age too. And with the Teal Fellowship, so with that as well, I know at that young age, you don't have many peers. There's not many people around you at that age that are like building venture-backed companies. Is that why you became like part of Teal Fellowship? Tell me more of that side of it too.
So the Teal Fellowship, for anyone who's not aware, is a program that was put together by Peter Thiel, where effectively his original thesis was that you had all these young individuals who had great ideas and great capabilities, who were kind of getting sucked into this societal engine of going to college and going through this sort of this motion. And he believed that if you gave them capital and you gave them an opportunity, that you could have a proof point that you don't need to go to college, you don't need to go through school to end up building something successful. To be clear, whether you go to college or not go to college, I think that like that debate is not one really that should be had. Like, I think it's great. You're a founder, you're an entrepreneur, you're learning. Everyone has their own pace. Like, it's very exciting. We should all be in this together. But for me, I started Coder while I was in high school. I knew that I wasn't going to college, and that was a very, very contrarian idea at the time. I think that nowadays you have some proof points where you have some acceptability of, oh, you're not going to go to school. Like, there's some communities that embrace that.
Yeah.
But for the most part back then, it was not loved. And certainly today, still, it's not loved. I think there are probably lots of founders and entrepreneurs who have parents that idea would never be acceptable. And I was super lucky that my pop was very, very supportive. And so the Teal Fellowship was really nice for me because, when I joined, we probably had 30 or 40 employees. I was, 21 maybe, and I was very alone. Like, I was building this company. My peers were far older than I was, and I felt the weight of that. And the TL Fellowship was really special to me because it was the first time that I met kids who were my age building incredible things, who were in a similar phase of life.
Yeah, I love that. And coming back then to Wander. So you had this experience before of another venture-backed company. Use that. You're way more prepared this time around. It's still going to be hard though.
Totally.
Take me through some of those early days in terms of, okay, we got to find the homes. What locations are we going to choose? Where? How much funding do we need to do this? Like that piece of it, I'm very curious about.
Yeah. So we had the idea and then we needed the first few pieces of inventory. And it was as unscalable as getting in the car and going and looking at houses. And I knew that from a speed perspective, that the fastest way for us to kickstart would actually be to own the first few assets on balance sheet, which, to be clear, is a exceptionally capitally intensive idea and very, very unscalable. There's a classic, YC quote, which is do things that don't scale. And I thought that it was the fastest way to basically create this ultimate experience and see if these paying customers on the wait list would actually pay for a product, because that was the next thing that I wanted to know, right? It was basically like, are they going to pay for the product? And then I'll figure out how to scale it. But like, let's go down these levels of problem solving. And so like, when you think about this idea, I had gone from, growth stage CEO, having raised $50+ million at 23 to pre-seed starting Wander. And literally, like, when we were launching those first houses, I was there 24 hours a day, scrubbing the floors, like understanding the cleaning crews, trying to think through how the software would work, while also raising capital. My early team members have photos of me walking around random gas stations in the middle of nowhere with my laptop, taking VC calls and pitching them as compellingly as I can, and then immediately turning around and like solving what were really small fires at the time relative, but were the fires that would burn down the company. Obviously, like, things scale really quickly. You go from 1 or 2 locations to 10 to 30, and then all of a sudden you're at 1,000 plus, and who knows what's next from here.
Oh, it's going to keep growing. Do you think, I guess I'm curious on why you think it hadn't been done before in this particular way, because you have the Airbnbs out there, you have other ones that are doing a different angle of it. This vertical kind of integration of doing everything, what do you think about that in terms of why it hadn't been done?
I think that it's really hard. And so, like, what do I mean when I say that? First, you have to build a booking platform that's an incredible user experience that rivals really great companies that have spent literally billions of dollars building their platforms. So Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, et cetera.
Yep.
Then you have to create a brand. So, I knew that brand was going to be one of the limiting factors in building this company. And so I had to find and invest in one that would scale, that wouldn't be a bottleneck. And so we ended up getting Wander.com, at Wander on the social platforms. That's an incredibly difficult challenge to build a really beautiful, meaningful brand. And then you end up with the supply problem. So the go-to-market, how do you get the supply onto the marketplace? And then you take it a step deeper and you say, how do I enable a margin profile that is really scalable, that scales at the speed of software? And for me, I had this vision that property management was effectively this logistically heavy, human-heavy business that could be done by software. And so we wanted to build this agentic property management software that we called, now that it's fully built, Wander OS, that actually coordinates all of these vendors, cleaning crews, handyman, does intelligent pricing, calendar management, chat management, all the things around it. And so, like, if you imagine me pitching you this idea as a pre-seed investor, you would think that I am absolutely nuts, like 100%. And I was. Like, the only people who backed me were previous investors of mine. Redpoint had seen me build at Coder. They led our pre-seed. I had friends who had seen me build, other founder friends. They had invested in me. But candidly speaking, I don't know if I would have been able to convince anyone to back me if it was my first time. It was such an ambitious idea. So I think that's why it hasn't been done, because, like, it is crazy. And candidly speaking, like, I don't think that most founders have the skill set that can cross between software and hospitality and go to market. And those experiences are something that it's not like I just came out of high school with. A lot of them I borrowed from the growth that I had at Coder.
There's a lot to unpack and a few different things. Like obviously, a repeat founder is very helpful in this particular case. Like you needed to be a repeat founder who had that skill set to then have it and have the desire to want to build this company for it to work out. And obviously it's worked out. We put a lot of work into that. One thing you talked about before is the brand piece of it and needed to get that right. I want to unpack that a little bit. What were some of the aspects that you thought of? Obviously getting the domain name. Just take me through more of that, like how you thought about, okay, do you bring someone on board to kind of help this? I want to know more about that side of things.
Yeah, so a brand is effectively a promise to your customer. That's what it means. And so when you think about that promise, you have to be very explicit in terms of what do I stand for? What do I want people to think and to feel? And that can sound very wishy-washy, like this idea of like, well, what do I want people to think or feel when they hear about my company? But you really do want to be very deliberate. And when you think about that, then things like your name, your logo actually come from that idea. Like for us, obviously, we were building a travel company, but I didn't want to call it like travel.com. Like there's no feeling in that. It's like you to wander, like is such a beautiful word.
It's so good.
And I wanted to build a company that also honored the beauty of that word, like from a soul perspective, that like that is such a beautiful word. It's a beautiful meaning, and the feeling that you get, like we needed to deliver on, again, that brand promise. And so, then you get into the logo and it's like, well, how do I want people to feel? And I remember as a kid spinning the globe in class with all of this childlike curiosity and excitement about where am I going to go? And so I knew that was going to be the logo, which all of our designers, everyone, we didn't have lots of designers. We had one contractor at the time, very early stage, was like, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look good on mobile. It's not going to be scalable. You should go with what everyone's doing for the mainstream. And I was like, no, like this is how I want people to feel. I don't care if it's going to be more complex. And ultimately, I think that like, I do love our brand. I do love our logo. It has stayed the same from starting the company to now, 4 years later. And I think that it looks classically strong enough that it will hopefully, stay very strong 100 years into the future. But that's how I think about brand.
It seems like the branding is perfection. Like you see it anywhere on social. Okay, the images, even like having like the moving background now in the app, like that addition too.
Oh, I'm so glad that you like that. That was like me.
Yes.
I was like, I am very in the weeds. I'm very product and design oriented. And so on some of the properties, not all of them, but on some of them, when you hover over the image on the property page, you'll see the sky move. You'll see the trees move. And so I was inspired because I think we all watched Harry Potter as a kid, and there was that scene where the newspaper would like come to life. And I was like, how cool would it be if you're on this website and all of a sudden the image comes to life? Like you're not expecting it. It's a little piece of delight. So it makes me really happy to hear at least one user likes it, because it's like, that's one of those things where like you have this crazy product founder who's like telling like the team and designer like, hey, like I have this idea and it's like not going to generate any revenue at all, but maybe it'll create some type of delight. So it makes me very happy.
But it is literally a talking point. I mean, I obviously do a ton of research for every episode, and I'm looking through more and more of Wander, and I've followed along for years. So I have seen the progression a bit, and then seeing that, I was like, wait a minute, that seems like it's new. Little touches matter. And obviously like, you're an experience company. Like this is at the end of the day what it is. So like every experience from the beginning to someone seeing you to them booking and then having to stay and then they're done, like everything matters. And that touches one of them.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that term, everything matters. So that's actually one of our virtues in the company, is everything matters. And when you have that philosophy, everything from any unhappy guest to optimizing your expenses to designing a beautiful user experience, you end up with this level of focus and love for your product and for your company that I think is really special. I think that one other virtue that I would recommend any founder who's pursuing that idea to align it with is we have a virtue, which is no one is coming to save you. And what does that mean, and how did it come about? When I was in the first house and we were going to launch in 24 hours, things were a mess. There was a ton of work to do. And I remember being there with the team and saying, no one is coming to save us. Like, if we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. Like, there's no saving grace. There's no, like, no one is coming to save us. And so when you pair those two ideas together, that everything matters and that no one is coming to save you, then you feel this sense of agency and responsibility that hopefully can build a beautiful company.
Well, it reminds me too of Izzy Sharp from the Four Seasons and him saying, like, you know, excellence is the capacity for taking pains. Like, that is exactly what that type of detail at Wander reminded me of. And because I read that book recently, his book, which is phenomenal.
It's on my reading list. I
is it really?
Haven't read it yet.
Oh, no. Based on the company you're building, that is like the perfect, because every
Yeah.
detail they go through and like how they progress and everything is
I'm
phenomenal.
really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think it's a good one.
literally on my bookshelf. So it's, yeah.
That's amazing. It's sitting on my desk actually in my apartment, and I loved it because like it is all about details with them. And how do you build Four Seasons, for instance, like this massive conglomerate, like
Totally.
but it's all in the details, and that was how they stood out. One thing is that you mentioned with kind of owning the homes, obviously, like the first couple of ones you bought, and then you want to see if people will pay for that, and yes, they paid. But take me through more of that, like first reaction when you actually had the homes. What was some of the feedback you were getting? And you're like, okay, were we right with this hypothesis? Were we wrong? Like, take me more of that.
So Wander did something very unconventional, which is that we built the most extreme version of the customer experience at the start. And then as we needed to scale, we kind of pulled it back a little bit while making sure that we didn't see a big degradation in the Net Promoter Score. And so when Wander launched, every possible epic thing you could imagine existed. Like, you could control the entire home right through the app. And so, like, turn on and off the lights, unlock the front door, like turn on the music through the Wander app. You could unlock the Tesla in the garage.
Crazy.
Like, you had all this beautiful design architecture. At the time, you could ask concierge to do anything. You could say, hey, like, book me these experiences in a private jet and whatever else. And concierge would do it as if it was your personal executive assistant. The reason why we decided to do this, and to be clear, this was with a team of 10 people. So this wasn't like, oh, we had 100 people. This was like, I wanted to show the world what we were capable of, what things could look like. Now, to be clear, those systems were super, super janky. It wasn't like we built this like hyper scalable smart home tech system. Like we built a wrapper that like janked through the API of like smart things, as an example. And with the Tesla integration, that was actually like pretty well built because, you know, someone from Tesla like gave us access or something along those lines.
Nice.
But concierge was like, you know, some of those requests were like me, like handling whatever it was. But what I wanted to do again was gain you know, this understanding. And so what was really cool about that is we started at the extreme. We found product market fit. We found idea market fit. We found something that people were willing to pay for. And then we entered into that next question of like, how do you scale supply? What pieces scale? What pieces don't? And then we walked back from there.
The Wander OS, that now you can call it Wander OS. Early on, obviously, you're figuring out more of these things. Like, how do you even like begin? Because you think about the cleaning and everything to organize. Obviously, in the early days, that was not the case. You didn't have it like fully fleshed out, but you probably had an idea of what you wanted to get to in terms of that.
Totally.
What was the timeline, or even like just the progression of that to get to that point?
Yeah. So I viewed this idea of having to achieve a very high margin profile, having to have it scale at the speed of software, as a have to in the business. And so then the question is like, well, how does it work? What would the system be? And you kind of work backwards from there, very like first principles thinking. And so what I saw was effectively logistics management and coordination, which is I need to get a cleaning crew to come at this date, at this time, and complete this list of things. And there's no reason why that can't be software and AI, which very early on was a hyper contrarian idea. I mean, now everyone has a thesis about how AI is going to do everything and it can coordinate, you know, all these things. But when I was first starting, it was seen as like impossible, insane. And I still think a lot of folks feel that way. And so, you know, we got to work. And I would say that it took us, obviously we've been building software the entire time. It's, you know, my background, and our CTO is fantastic. But now we've reached the point where 100% of tasks are coordinated through WanderOS, which is a pretty meaningful thing.
Yeah.
And we have about a 60% deflection rate with AI agents, which means that 60% of those tasks are being coordinated and handled automatically via these agents. So think scheduling a cleaning crew, dealing with a payment, responding to a guest. And so reaching 100% deflection rate, or let's be realistic, like a 95% deflection rate, is something that is now possible. And it's what enables our margin profile. We have 70% plus gross margins in a business that absolutely shouldn't. We're able to grow 20-30% month over month in a business that should be growing 20-30% a year. So that idea ended up working out. And candidly speaking, if I had failed in that endeavor, or if I didn't know how to build or whatever else, then Wander wouldn't exist as it does today.
Well, it reminds me of the George Mack essay he just wrote about high agency. He's like, does it defy the law of physics? And if the answer is no, then it's possible.
That is so funny. So
Right?
I wrote that in my first investor update 3
Really?
years ago, that Wander was a big idea, and ultimately it doesn't defy the laws of physics. So it should be possible. That's literally in my first ever investor update. So that's great to hear.
It also reminds me, because I've done a lot of research on the kind of world-class founders. Like Jeff Bezos mentioned one time, he was saying like, when people come to him with ideas or like something for products that can't be done or can't be done, like they come to him basically saying, we need to do this thing. He's like, show me a magical product and how we get there. Don't give me problems on that. It's like, what is the magical experience? And then we'll figure out a way to make that happen.
Yeah, it's like working backwards. Even like you think about some products work backwards from cost, which I think is also really cool too. Like this idea of like, what is the customer experience? Or like for Costco, they work backwards for like what is the price that someone would pay for this, and work backwards. And so I think it's very interesting to think about working backwards, which comes back to how we started this podcast about planning, which comes back even further into the idea of like planning backwards from your death. And so I think that it's a really important idea. It's like founders should be working backwards. They should know what they want to do. And ultimately, like that will help you conquer the maze a lot faster.
With those first few homes, how are you deciding on locations?
Yeah. So the first home I knew I wanted to be outside the Bay Area. And that was purely strategic. Like tech was all in the Bay Area, and so I wanted to establish Wander as this like new exciting startup that was coming to light. The third location was a little bit north, so about 200 miles north, and then we immediately went across the United States all the way over to New York. The reason why I did that was because I wanted to prove this idea that Wander didn't need any type of geographic density to operate the units. I wanted every piece of software and system that we built to be unit independent, because I knew that hopefully one day that we would be adding 200, 300, 1,000 homes a month. And if the systems weren't based on the individual units, then I would end up with having to re-architect the company every single time we hit a new milestone. And so that's how we thought about locations originally. Now today, we'll probably add 200, 300 homes this month. It really is about curation, data science, a lot of very technical ideas. But soon, we'll be well beyond the U.S. into, Europe and the rest. And that's something I'm so passionate about, is to fulfill like the logo's like quote unquote prophecy, right? Like the logo is the globe, and it would be really beautiful to actually have locations all across the globe.
What complexities come into play with
international?
Yeah, international.
So international expansion is very expensive. And I learned this during a talk once where a founder was looking to expand into Europe, but they were expanding at the tail end of their Series B. So they had raised all this money after their Series A, and then they start building, and then they're like, okay, we're going to approach our Series C. Let's expand into Europe ahead of our Series C. It'll be a great growth story. What ended up happening is they didn't have enough capital to conquer Europe, and ended up having to pull back. And so they wasted all of this money. They killed their growth story, and that left them in a very dangerous position where ultimately they had to make major cuts and whatever else. And they still have not expanded into Europe. So you're looking at a mistake that ended up costing them at this point probably 4 or 5 years, from a momentum perspective, from a fundraising perspective, from a customer perspective.
Jeez.
And what I learned was, listening to him talk about this experience, was that when you go into international expansion, everything is going to cost twice as much as you think it's going to cost. And you need to go in with an absolute war chest, with the idea that like, we are going to conquer it. We're going to be able to prove it out. And if it fails, that the company is still going to be okay. I'm not going to have to pull out from a place of weakness. I'll pull out from a place of strength. And there are plenty of stories in this. When you look at Facebook, Facebook has never been able to get into Russia. Uber was never able to get into China. they were able to get everywhere else, which is of course amazing. But even the biggest companies failed to get into some of these key regions, and they had massive war chests, and they still failed to do it. So when I hear, young founders or founders who aren't well capitalized talk about, international expansion as their growth tactic, that's a lot harder than you think. There's a lot of expense, a lot of complexity, a lot of legal, a lot of administrative that just will cost you far more than you think and take twice as long. And not to say that it's not a great way to think about the future, but you need to do it from a place of strength.
We talked a little bit before about timing. Why is the timing now in terms of expansion? Why not a year ago? Why not a year from now? Just say anything more of that.
So I think that Wander was born in 2021, where you had obviously the COVID was sort of in full sweep. People weren't staying at hotels, and everyone was staying at a vacation rental. And what that meant is that literally almost the entire world had a bad vacation rental experience at some point. And so you had this massive growth in the industry, great occupancy, et cetera, but then you also had everyone kind of develop a little bit of a distaste. And so you had that, I think, from a customer demand perspective, but then you also had a very early special moment in time when it came to technology, when it came to, this intelligence, from an AI perspective that just didn't exist before. And we started leveraging it exceptionally early. We were using it very early. I saw what the curve was going to look like. Now today, I think that everyone is like, oh yeah, it's so obvious. But it was a very, very contrarian statement. And I'd say that those two things, those two why nows has been what has allowed for Wander to exist. But to be clear, I think that a lot of it is, again, just that even if someone had the idea for this company, that it is so radically hard to put together, that I have always felt, again, the idea was bestowed upon me as this thing to build and to protect, almost like it is a privilege of mine as opposed to something that is or was my creation. I imagine it just floating around in the universe, and I just got picked with it.
I mean, to that point, do you feel like this is your life's work, or do you believe in that? More?
So it's a great question. I've recently gone through this reflection. I just turned 27, and you have to ask yourself why am I here? What am I doing? And I decided that my life's purpose was massive good. That's what I wanted to align myself on. And I may fall short of that, but that was the idea. I wanted to create massive good in this world. And so, you have a personal perspective with that, and then you also have obviously your work as part of who you are. And when I think about Wander, Wander is my heart and joy. It's my entire soul. I have the logo tattooed on my wrist. I love this company, and I love the people in it. I love our customers, and I'm so grateful I get to work on it each and every day. And so it would be an honor to be the CEO, to take it all the way from here to IPO, and hopefully from IPO to being one of those really large legendary companies. But ultimately, that is a privilege, not a right. I have to work each and every day to improve, to stay in that seat. And so that's how I think about it.
When did you get the tattoo? How early?
As soon as the logo was completed, I got the tattoo. I remember getting the design file while I was driving up Northern California. I was with our chief of staff, who was sitting in the seat next to me. And I was like, what we should do? We should commemorate this moment. Pulled off into some random tattoo parlor in Northern California, and got it done. I think that I saw, which is hard to believe, but I saw where this company was going, and I wanted to wake up each and every day and be reminded of that and my dedication, to it. I don't necessarily advise people getting tattoos of their company logos, to be very clear. So I don't want this to be romanticized, because it can definitely, you could end up with a bunch of tattoos of things that didn't work.
Here's all the companies I started.
Yeah. But candidly speaking, I was so compelled, and so in love, and still very much am. So
you mentioned massive good. Where does that come from, you think?
I think that in my life, early childhood, etc., like I had a lot of difficult things, and those difficult things ended up allowing me to see the world either through two lenses. One of, everything is terrible and the world's against me and whatever else. Or I could see it through the other lens, which would be like the sun is shining, the world is spinning, like I'm alive. And what ended up happening is like I have brainwashed myself so much into this state of like gratitude and joy that I find myself just like wanting to do good like onto others. And at the end of the day, like we do all die, like there's no question about that. And so you can't take your money with you, you can't take your fancy car, you can't take your private jet. Like what do you do? And I think that you should work because you're passionate, and you can also work for like those fun things. It's great to have a goal, if you love cars, like go get a great car. But I think that like for me, the most fulfilling thing is like doing good, like trying to do good for fellow man, for the world. It's a very like abstract idea, but I think the fact that it's so abstract is something that'll keep me busy for a long time. A goal that is impossible to achieve.
Yeah, no, I like it though. It's nice. I think, and one of the things I want to go back to, we kind of this whole story of, obviously it's been crazy, like to the growth of Wander over time, and we talked before the interview kind of started about how much you've grown and the capital coming up too as well, which is going to be exciting. The funding this business, you have a massive idea. You're a repeat founder. You're young, but you like know what you want to build. Funding it, you had the pre-seed. They believed in you. A couple companies. You obviously then had to grow from there.
Totally.
What was the next round? Tell me more of the funding side of it. When did you like get the proof points where you're like, okay, we can actually continue this thing? Like, tell me more about the funding.
Yeah. So the way to think about funding is milestone based. And what you're trying to demonstrate to investors is that you are able to execute and the idea is working. It's those two pieces. And so there are different milestones at every round of funding. They're generally relatively prescribed. So you don't even need to guess. At the pre-seed, people are looking for your company to have a name. They're looking for a really good pitch deck and some proof points of idea market fit and maybe an early prototype. Those are the things that they're looking for. The second phase, your seed round, you're looking for a platform that exists, that has users, some level of progress, and some level of customer love. Maybe just like one or two customers who are willing to pay, who are really excited. Okay, great. And as to be clear, you still have to go, you have to pitch, all that sort of good stuff. But okay, you have unlocked your seed. Now you have to get to your Series A, which typically is milestone based from a revenue perspective. So, it used to be 1 million in ARR. Now it's more like 2. And for certain companies like, e-commerce, et cetera, it can be much more. And so then you have to get to that phase, which again is not easy. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other pieces that allow you, but it's typically revenue based. The Series B is your growth round, the start of your growth round. So you've found product market fit. You're anywhere between 5 to 15 million in ARR. It used to be 5 was the Series B milestone. Now it's more like 10 to 15 is generally what I would say. To be clear, if you're a founder with 5 and you're going out for your Series B, then you may have more difficulty, but you could get it done.
Do it. Yeah.
And that round is the round where between your B and your C, the thing that you're figuring out is you're absolutely dialing in your unit economics. You're taking all the recipe for success that you have and you're bringing it together, and you're proving to the world that this is going to be a real company. Your C is basically taking something that's real and tripling it, quadrupling it, and then you're going to go an IPO. So the Series B, I think, is probably the hardest round. It's certainly the hardest round. I think that I've slept, I got 6 hours of sleep last night, so I'm feeling pretty great. But gosh, this last week I was running on 10 hours of sleep cumulatively. And it was so rough. But I'm so lucky. I have a great team and fortunate that people have enjoyed the progress that we've had and and believed in me and believed in me getting through this next phase. But that's sort of how to think about the stages, quote unquote, like peeling back layers, peeling back proof points. You also have to remember that you have to prove that you can execute. So it's not just getting those pieces, but that you can do it in a certain time period. So, you'll see a lot of like the $0 to $100 million in ARR, like rocket ships that happen in a short period. Realistically, I'd say like pre-seed to seed should be about 6 months, to a year. Seed to Series A, probably also about a year, year and a half, maybe 2 years. Series A to Series B can be anywhere between a year and a half to 3 years. And then, it should go from there. It's sort of the level of progression that like VCs are looking for to show that I can give you money here and you're going to IPO and call it 8 to 10 year window.
So with Series B, which you're raising now, let's say
we just signed our Series B term
closed.
Sheet.
Love it. Amazing. So by the time this is live, we can also
yes, you're getting it very live. I am in the middle of the process. Just signed the term sheet literally like 2 days ago, and then obviously you have all the chaos that flows around that.
Yeah, so you're still like, sleep hopefully gets 6 hours, phenomenal. We're getting closer to 8. Is that ever a goal actually? Or
yeah, totally. I mean, I am very like, I don't want to endorse this like hustle idea of like don't sleep. I think it's terrible. Like you should totally sleep. I'm just in a period in the company where I literally don't have a choice. Like if I do not give my 100%, then failure is totally an option.
Well, and also to that point, so with the Series B, let's set the scene. Where is Wander today at the Series B?
Yeah, in terms of
like how many locations or like team size, anything you can say.
Yeah, so we just crested 1,000 locations. We've been growing 20-30% month over month. So you have to take the growth rate into account. We have about 100-ish people, a little bit more. Our net promoter score is 85 for Q1, and we should finish out the year at about anywhere between a $70 to $80 million GMV run rate.
Crazy, man. Yeah. Crazy. Take me through more of the scaling part of it then. I know we're getting towards the end of the interview here. Like with the scaling side of it, you have the early days, your proof points, and like obviously you've raised money, you've progressed. 1,000 locations is insane. Like take me through what has been helpful on scaling, more of that process for you, anything you can say around that.
So there's this idea that Nigel Morris, the founding partner at QED, talked about with me recently, which is code cracking, right? You have certain things in your business that you have to unlock to get to your next phase of scale. And that ultimately takes a certain type of individual, your like code cracker, who, as he noted, is not the same type of person who will go and potentially scale it, right? Your code cracker could be different than the scaler. For Wander, there are so many things. It probably would take us 3 hours to go through all the code, so to speak, that we had to crack to unlock this level of scale. I would say that I do know now how Wander can go from 200, 300 homes a month to 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. And I should say 5,000 to 10,000 is probably a lot.
That seems like a lot.
Yeah, there's there's some code cracking there for sure. So I'll go back to 1,000. Well, there we go. 200, 300 to 1,000 seems more reasonable. But yeah, it's a joy. It's something that ultimately you have to love. Like one of our virtues is we love problems, and that's because at the end of the day, literally we wake up every day and we solve a problem that then creates a new problem.
Yeah, like more customers, great. Then we have to solve that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And where does the REIT come into play? So you did one for I think it was like 2 years or something.
Yep.
Is that part of the bigger strategy when you have to go bigger? Like tell me more of that.
Yeah. So it's all about the progression on the supply side. So Wander started owning the initial assets on balance sheet to control the experience, to learn very quickly, to understand how the coordination with vendors worked, how we would need to set up the owner dashboard, all these different pieces, and ultimately to find product market fit. Then the next question was to start to scale. And so we knew that we weren't ready to have third-party inventory yet, but we needed to have a way to scale without spending our own capital. And so the idea was to basically have investors own a piece of these homes so that we could go and add more of them without losing control. And so that's where the REIT came in, was that idea. The REIT ended up scaling to about 35-ish locations, which is actually pretty large on from a real estate perspective, from a total capital perspective. But at that point, we then had maturity of the system, maturity of the brand, and we started to have these owners who owned the homes who were saying, hey, I trust you now. I'm willing to give it to you. I'm willing to let you operate it and to grow. And so once we had reached that point, then the REIT investors had a very successful exit, 22%, cumulative return, which is great in the real estate world. And we were able to start scaling entirely asset light, which is a requirement to have, this level of scale.
Right.
This is also why I think that it would be very, very challenging for anyone to try and build a competitor to Wander in this context, because solving the cold start problem is like a very, very radically hard idea. Like to go from owned to investor owned to then, operated, and is just a very complicated piece. But that was the only way that I saw to post year over year growth while still maturing the company and peeling back those layers.
The thing that's interesting, I had Jacob Jaber from Phil's Coffee, co-founder of Phil's Coffee, and they may have like 80 locations now, but he was saying their growth was a lot of pull. Customers pulled it out of them. They had the first location for like 5 years or something.
Yeah.
Customers pulled it out of them. Tell me the demand side for you then, in terms of then you obviously know you have to expand, you raise money, milestones to reach, but there's this demand piece that has to match up with supply. Take me through the demand side of it in terms of that.
Yeah, so we were always supply constrained in the business. I think we had like 100,000 users and like 5 locations or something. And so, ultimately we have now reached the point where we now have about 400,000 something users on the platform, and our focus is actually more on activation of those users. So this was something that I was also talking about with Nigel Morris, and I think it's such an important idea that you shouldn't only be focused on growing your user base. You should also be focused on activating them. And so, like, to use the example from a podcast perspective, like the goal is not just to get more subscribers. The goal is to say, okay, I have 20,000 subscribers or 100,000 subscribers or whatever. How do I activate them? Like, how do I get them to do stuff?
Yeah.
And so the same can be true of the user base. Like, I'd much rather have 5,000 users who do stuff than a million users who do nothing.
Yeah.
And so it's a very interesting paradigm shift, which again is very much going from Series B to C. It's not just about user growth; it's about user activation, which is, in my opinion, a very like nuanced idea.
No, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned. Like, I've literally the last like 6 months has all been thinking about, like always email subscribers, always whatever. Like, how do we do more with them? Not even just growing the top line.
It's not about growing; it's about activating.
Yeah. So with that, what are some of the things you've done for that? It's just like literally just sending more emails like, hey, tell me more.
Yeah. So one interesting thing that we've recently started is effectively, a user we have all this beautiful data. User will go, they'll sign up, and maybe they initiate a checkout on a certain set of dates, but they abandon cart. And so my question is like, okay, our average order value is very high. It's about $5,200, which for a consumer company is like pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And like, that's a big purchase. And the fact that people right now are just doing it through our website is like pretty high. Like, what if those people just need like a little bit of touch, right? And so a system that we've recently begun testing, which has phenomenal results, is that you abandon cart, and you get this beautiful email that's like, hey, I saw that you checked out for Christmas, at this property at these dates. I think it would be a really wonderful experience. Like, let me help you, like, walk you through the process. Do you have any questions, whatever else? Literally to the point where like our AOV is high enough that we can totally support a sales phone call like to that individual and make sure that they get through it. And so if you were to scale that out, like it gets a lot more like interesting and complicated. But like that's an idea of activating your user versus just saying like, oh, we're just going to, email them to death or whatever else. Like that's I think the lazier approach. Like there's so much you can do now with data and enrichment of your contact information and all these different things. I mean, you can even like, have the email address, enrich that to a full profile, and like, use like a handwritten card service to like have something where like, there's plenty of low cost ways that you can really like activate and reach your customer.
Well, and then to your point with the data, it's like, okay, how many of those do you do? And you see, wait, we send a few like handwritten notes. This leads to how much more revenue? Like it's insane.
Right.
Like what?
Yeah. And that's the idea too. Cause again, people get so wrapped up in this idea of like, I'm just going to spend money on Google and Facebook ads or whatever else.
Yeah.
And like, those are really, really good for getting the account creation, getting that user data. Maybe you're paying whatever, $5, $10 for an account creation. But if you're trying to just Google ad your way through volume to call it a checkout, you could be spending hundreds of dollars from a CAC perspective, thousands of dollars, whatever the product is. And so the way you should be thinking about it from a marketing perspective is like, let me capture that user data. So you're basically buying the user from Google and Facebook. Now you know who they are. You know they're interested in your product. It's your job to activate them. Like, you shouldn't just keep spending your way and hope that like, the 100% account creation goes down to like 0.001 checkouts. Like, you really need to be focused on conversion. And that's not just like ease of flow, but it's this idea of activation.
To that point, what are the metrics you care about most?
So Wander has quite a few. I'm actually going through redefining them as we go from Series B to Series C, because you have to think about this idea of Wander has all the ingredients for success, but bringing it all together in a beautiful and high growth way beyond where it is today is going to end up being very, very metrics focused. And you have to think about what metrics are directly competitive to what other metrics. So like, if you have a high net promoter score, but you want to get your costs down and your margin up, like, well, you can't just reduce the quality of your product, because then your NPS. And so you have, and this again was something that Nigel Morris was talking about. For those entrepreneurs who haven't heard of him before, he is basically like the founder of Capital One, founding and managing partner at QED. He's one of the most brilliant people ever. I highly recommend looking him up.
Yeah.
He talked about this idea of like keeping things in balance, not having a focus on just one metric, but keeping all these things in line. And that's almost this balancing act that founders have to do. And so, that's really like my big focus for now is, the basic things like NPS and your margin profile and, net present value and all those different pieces. But what is the interconnectivity of all of those pieces, and how do you ensure that you don't lose sight of this one lonely metric over here while you're staring at, like, call it your CAC as an example?
Yeah, and I love the idea of activation. Like in terms of that makes so much sense. It's been on my mind so much the last like few months, and it's like I definitely disregarded it early on.
It is such a obvious, non-obvious thing, because we get so focused on growth. And again, that was something, for us, like, we've been growing really, really quickly and we're having lots of success, but like, we can take a $5,000 average order value and capture probably $10,000 to $15,000 of total spend around it. We can take an account creation that's just sitting dormant and activate it into a $10,000 LTV over a 3-year period. Like, we don't need to grow. Like, it's ironic. Like, Wander already today, like, if a really interesting stat. So our current total number signed locations, and user base and everything else, if I just focused on that, is good for about $150 million a year of GMV. And that's without me adding a single new property or a single new user. Like, and so it's about that focus is like this activation of like who exists there today. Obviously you want to continue to grow.
Yeah.
But it's more than that. And ironically, like, if you focus on activation as opposed to growth is very expensive. And so you can, still grow, quote unquote, without growing your user base, without growing supply, but very, very profitably.
I know we're out of time here. I'm just curious, where does this get to? Like, how big does Wander get, you think?
Yeah. So I guess, like, first of all, like, I hope, I guess, is like, I hope, like, I can't, I don't want to be like so egotistical or like confident. Like, we're very lucky. We're very fortunate. We have all the right things happening for us. But as any founder, entrepreneur knows, it's so much hard work and there's a lot of risks. And I plan on giving my life and soul to trying to get us there. When you think about the market we're going after, it's about 300,000 locations across the globe. It represents roughly about $35 billion of GMV. And so that's our focus. And then from there, we'll be expanding into other products and services. But that's what you'll see from Wander in the short term is continuous aggressive growth across the globe, delighting our customers relentlessly. And then from there, offering other products and services, leveraging the distribution mode that we've hopefully created.
John Andrew, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. It was a joy. Yeah, really excited.